He orders a steak like it's just another Tuesday night, and a waitress slips him a note that makes the whole room suddenly feel too bright, too loud, too present. Under the willow tree. You promised. That's all it says. No name, no signature. Just that single letter at the bottom, an E written the way a child draws a moon. Tentative, careful, as if afraid of finishing the curve. If you're new here, let me paint the scene like you're sitting right across from me. The dining room is one of those places that wants you to forget you're hungry. Low lighting that flatters everyone. A string quartet doing modern covers so softly you think you dreamed it. White tablecloths that practically iron themselves. The kind of place a man like Julian Croft can disappear in because everyone expects him to be everywhere. You know Julian's name, even if you don't know you know it. His niche? Building the kind of companies that build other companies. Infrastructure, for the people who make the internet feel inevitable. He's learned to live like a whisper in a room of shouts, control the variables, control the outcome. That night, he's doing what billionaires do when they're tired, eating something expensive to feel normal for 5 minutes. Then the note arrives with the water. The waitress, dark hair pinned back, sleeves rolled. A quick, steady way of moving that says she's done this 1,000 times. Slips it like a magician hiding a coin under a glass. She doesn't blink, doesn't wait. She sets down the carafe, nods, vanishes. He looks at the note. He looks at me, well, not me, but the version of me you become when you're watching somebody about to make a choice that will bend their whole life. He doesn't open it right away. Not because he's scared, but because he already knows. You ever have a promise that sits in your chest like an old photograph? You know the corners, you can feel the crease lines. And you also know that if you look too long, you'll remember everything. The smell of summer, the way she laughed when the wind stole her hat, the first time you said forever and meant it like a dare. Julian opens the note, and there it is. The willow. And that. He folds it once, then again, like he wants to make it smaller. He fails. Some things won't shrink just because you tell them to. Can I get you anything else for now? The waitress asks, reappearing like a question mark. Julian studies her face polite, professional, carrying a fatigue that doesn't get in the way of grace. Her name tag reads, Mia. Her eyes are steady. She doesn't fidget, and yet there's a flicker, a glint of something like recognition when his gaze lands on her like a spotlight. Actually, he says, voice smooth like memory sanded it down over the years, could I ask where you got this? Mia doesn't even look at the note. From the hostess, sir, table 12. He nods. Table 12 is a corner with a view, the kind of table that makes every other table jealous even if tables don't have feelings. He doesn't look yet. He doesn't need to. The room has a pulse now he can hear in his teeth. Your steak will be out shortly, Mia adds, and it sounds almost like an apology. Almost. He waits. 10 counts. 20. 30. Then he slips the note into his jacket pocket and turns like someone trying not to run in a museum. Table 12 is empty. The water glass has a print on it where fingers held too tight. The chairs pushed back as if someone left in a rush. The napkin is folded, not dropped. The details matter. They always do when a ghost walks into your evening and leaves a word like willow. Julian returns to his seat, and now he notices the music. The quartet is taking a pop hit apart and putting it back together like it's a wedding dress. Delicate, slow, filled with the kind of emotion you only let yourself feel in hindsight. He knows who E is, or at least who it could be. There are 1,000 names you collect when you climb, and then there's the name you never learned to live without. Era Vance. I could tell you their history right here in one swoop, but that's not how memory works. It doesn't hand you a biography. It spits out fragments, green glass bottles, a radio that only worked when you hit it just right, a willow tree that made a secret room out of summer. So instead, come with me into the moment where the past taps the present on the shoulder and says, "You still owe me an answer. Mia returns with the steak. Perfect grill lines, a sprig of rosemary like a flag of surrender. She sets it down and asks if he needs anything else. He says no, thanks, then, actually, yes. Could you tell the hostess if someone leaves a message for me, I'll wait. For how long? As long as it takes. There's that flicker again in her eyes. Maybe she recognizes the kind of waiting that has nothing to do with time. She nods and leaves. He doesn't touch the steak. Out of habit, he checks his phone. 3 missed calls. A calendar that looks like a game of Tetris nobody's winning. A news alert about a board vote he's been putting off because he's tired of talking to people who think ethics are just a brand of window cleaner. He puts the phone face down like it's a noisy child at a grown-up party. The note is a weight. Not heavy enough to hurt, just heavy enough to be real. I want you to picture him, if you can, not as a headline or a price tag, but as a man who's tried very hard to be the kind of person who doesn't make promises lightly. And yet there was a summer when he made one anyway, because that's what you do when you're young and the world is still soft enough to push with your hands. A shadow moves near the bar. Mia, again, whispering to the hostess. The hostess nods, slips something into a drawer. Julian stands. He walks over like the floor might give out if he steps wrong. I'm sorry, he says. The person from table 12, did they leave a name? Andrequile. The hostess smiles the way people do when they don't want you to see they're nervous. They asked me to give you the note and to say, he'll know. He'll know. Julian repeats, tasting the words. They are right and wrong at the same time. Is there anything else I can do for you, Mr. Croft? She asks, suddenly more formal, like she realized who he is. Would you tell Mia thank you? He says, because it's easier than saying, could you tell me who taught you to fold a napkin like a goodbye? Back at the table, the steak cools. When you're young and in love, time is too fast. When you're older and you've lost something, time is too slow. Either way, it's never on your side. He leaves without eating, pays cash, old habit. Some nights you don't want to leave a trail. Outside, the air has that wet city electricity, the kind that frizzes hair and plans. He looks down the block and sees a stand of trees half a mile away, lit from underneath like someone's about to propose. Not a willow among them, but it doesn't matter. The word has already done its job. It unlocked a door in him he's been holding shut. He takes out the note. The E looks younger now, somehow. He turns it over. Blank. He almost laughs. Of course it is. The past is usually clever enough to make you chase it. At the curb, a black sedan idles his driver. Mark has the patience of a saint and the playlist of a college DJ. Julian slides in. Home? Mark asks. Not yet. Where to, sir? Riverton. The old park. Mark glances at the clock, then at the sky. It's late. I know. He doesn't have to explain. Mark has been with him long enough to understand that sometimes a man needs to go stand where he used to stand, just to confirm the ground is still there. The city changes clothes as they drive neon to sodium, storefront to skyline. The bridge opens up like a mouth, swallowing them into the quiet on the other side. Riverton isn't far, but it feels like another map layered under this one. Been a while since we went out this way, Mark says. Yeah. Special occasion? Maybe. He doesn't say the word. Willow. It's a spell you don't cast lightly. The park is mostly empty. A couple walking a dog that looks like it could bench press Julian. A runner whose ponytail keeps time under a street lamp. The trees do that hush thing. Trees do leaves, listening for what comes next. They stop at the hill, at the path that curves down behind the bandstand. He knows it in the dark, like you know your own kitchen. Muscle memory is just memory with better shoes. There, by the pond, a willow used to make a room out of air. The city took it down years ago after a storm tore it like a dress. He'd pretended not to care. He'd said things like, "We make our own spaces." He stands where the shadow used to be. It isn't empty, though. Emptiness is a kind of presence when you love something that isn't there anymore. And this is where we need to talk about Era Vance. No, not her whole story. Not yet. Just enough to explain why a single word on a Tuesday could reroute a life like water around a stone. They met here. Or, if you want to be precise, they met because of here. She was all elbows and eyes and the kind of laugh that makes everyone else laugh because happiness is a contagion if you let it be. He was the kind of careful you get when you grow up with too much responsibility too early. She softened him. He steadied her. You know the dance. Under the willow, one night when crickets made the soundtrack and mosquitoes made the rules, they promised what young people promise when they believe in the version of forever that fits in a summer. We'll come back if we get lost. Not if. When. Because the truth is, people get lost even when they stay in the same place. Work can blur you. Money can make you loud and empty at the same time. Grief can shrink the world to a dot. So they made a rule for themselves. If the world took them too far, they'd come back to the willow and say the names of the people they used to be until those people answered. Then, life did what life does when it wants to be dramatic. It happened all at once. A job that wasn't supposed to be that big became that big. A trip that was supposed to be 2 weeks became 2 months. A goodbye that wasn't supposed to be goodbye curdled into silence. And then, one fall. A car crash on a road that curves like a lie. We'll get there, I promise. But tonight, in the present, Julian just stands in the dark and lets the shape of the past outline him like a chalk drawing. Mark waits in the car without checking the time. Some people show love by speaking. Mark shows it by not honking. When Julian finally slides back into the seat, his shirt smells like water and leaves. Home? Mark asks again. Yeah, Julian says. Home. On the way, the phone lights up. A message from David Chen, his head of security, his conscience with a badge. David doesn't use words he doesn't have to. The text says, "Heard you left dinner early. Everything okay?" Julian types. Define. Okay. 3 dots. Then, the kind where you need company or the kind where you need quiet. Julian stares at the screen and feels something like gratitude scrape against something like fear. He types, quiet. For now. David replies with a thumbs up. Then, a second later, a line that makes Julian almost smile. Call if the quiet starts talking. Back at the apartment glass, steel, the view everyone says they want until they realize skylines don't listen. Julian does something he hasn't done in a long time. He makes tea the way Era taught him. Boil. Wait. Pour. Patience isn't an accessory, it's an ingredient. He takes the note out and sets it beside the cup. Under the willow tree, you promised. The E stares up at him like a dare. If you're still with me, here's the part where the world outside starts to line up with the world inside. That note didn't fall out of the sky. Someone carried it, chose the moment, chose the restaurant, chose the waitress who wouldn't fumble when her hands shook. Mia. He replays her in his mind. The calm, the competence, that flicker. He pulls up the reservation system he shouldn't have access to but does because power makes doors look like curtains. He searches, staff roster, Mia Russo, night shift, address on file. It's not stalking when you're trying to answer a promise, he tells himself, and it's not entirely a lie. He doesn't go. Not yet. You don't knock on someone's life at midnight with a 20-year-old question. You wait until morning. You pretend you're civilized. He tries to sleep and does that thing where you list items in a room to prove you're in it. Chair, lamp, plant, shadow. You try it. It works, until it doesn't. At 4, he gives up. At 6, the city gives in lights switch from artificial to honest. At 7, he showers. At 8, he's in the car. Mark doesn't ask where. That's how you know you've worked with someone forever. You can drive to a memory without directions. The building is the kind that grew when neighborhoods pretended they weren't changing. Walk up. Brick that's seen things. A stoop that holds stories. He doesn't ring right away. He stands across the street like a man auditioning for a part in his own history. Mia appears at 8:30. Different clothes, same calm. She locks the door with 2 twists and a shoulder bump because old doors need love. She spots him instantly because men in suits don't haunt her block at dawn unless they're lost or looking. He raises a hand small, like he's waving to a cat. "Good morning," he says, closing the distance. "Mr. Croft," she says, no surprise in her tone. Just the soft kind of acknowledgement people use when they've run this conversation in their head already. "I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not." A beat. The kind you hear in music when the drummer leaves space on purpose. "You left me a note," he says. Not a question. "I delivered one," she corrects. "There's a difference." "From who?" Mia holds his gaze like a lifeguard watching waves. "From someone who thought you might still care about promises." He exhales. Not a laugh, not a sigh. Something in between. "I do," he says. And he means it so hard it almost hurts. "Good," she says. "Because the promise wasn't to you." He opens his mouth to ask and stops because the answer is walking down the sidewalk toward them like a headline written in lowercase. A woman in a light scarf, hat pulled down, moving the way people move when they meet the morning halfway. She's smaller than the memory. The eyes are the same. The way she checks the horizon before she steps off the curb, never reckless, always ready, that's the same too. "Era," Julian says, and it's a prayer even if he doesn't believe in anything but follow-through. Era smiles like the sun squeezed through a keyhole. "You're late," she says, and then, because kindness is her default setting, "I'm glad you came anyway." If this were a movie, this is where the music would swell and street traffic would politely hush. But this isn't a movie. A bus roars by. A dog barks like he has an opinion on fate. Somewhere, a radio insists it's summer, even if the air has that thin first bite of fall. They look at each other and then at Mia, who steps back like a stagehand after setting the scene. "I'll be at the corner," she says. "Take your time." How Julian starts. "Later," Era says gently. "Let's walk." He falls into step beside her, the way you fall back into your native language after years abroad. It's imperfect, but it's honest. "You kept it," she says. "The promise." He taps his chest. "I put it here so it couldn't fall out." She laughs, and it's the same, and that's almost unbearable. By the river, they stop. The city throws itself into the water, and it doesn't matter because the water doesn't keep score. Era presses a hand to the railing as if she needs to steady herself not because of him, but because of everything. "There's a reason for the note," she says. "I figured. It's not a test." She studies his face like a map that's been reprinted too many times. "It's an invitation." To what? To tell the truth about what happened, about why it happened, about who made it happen. The bus, the dog, the radio, everything goes out of focus like the world finally learned how to be quiet on cue. "The crash," he says. Era nods. "And the things that came after." Julian doesn't flinch. He spent years rehearsing, not flinching. But this is different. Not a boardroom curveball, not a deadline. It's the one thing that never respected his control. I know what you thought," Era says. "You thought distance would keep us safe. You thought silence would age into mercy. It didn't." He grips the rail, metal reminding him that the body is not a rumor. "Tell me what you need." Era looks him in the eye, and for a second he's under the willow, age 19. Heart too big for his chest. "I need you to help me fix what was broken. I need you to help me make sure the people who broke it can't keep breaking other things." "Marcus," he says, not softly. Era doesn't blink. "Among others." Behind them, Mia watches without intruding. She knows when to step in and when to be air. It's a skill. It's also survival. Why now? Julian asks, not because he doubts, but because he wants to honor the timing. Because someone finally slipped, Era says. Because someone left a trail they thought rain would wash away. She smiles again, and there's no joy in it, just certainty. Because maybe promises don't expire. Julian nods like a vow. Okay. I'll need David. Of course you will. And you'll need to tell me everything. I will, she says. But first coffee. The kind that doesn't taste like penance. They laugh, and the sound makes space for what comes next. The files, the late nights, the truths with sharp edges. First, a table by a window and a cup you don't apologize to for drinking slowly. As they turn toward the corner cafe, Mia falls in step, and Julian finally says what he's been holding since he first saw her. Thank you. For delivering the note. Mia shrugs like it was nothing. Some doors aren't heavy, she says. You just have to know where to push. If you've been wondering about that E at the bottom of the note, keep wondering a little longer. Some details land more softly when you've earned them. For now, here's what matters. A promise under a tree that isn't there anymore. A woman who refused to let the past stay vague. A man who remembered he likes the taste of truth more than he likes the feeling of being right. And a young waitress who knew exactly how to pass a message without dropping the world it carried. Inside the cafe, cups clink. The door chimes. Life goes on, as if life didn't just tilt. Julian takes out his phone and types one line to David. Need you, Riverton. Bring the file on Thorn. He doesn't hit send yet. He looks at Era. She nods, and it means more than permission. It means partnership. It means we. He presses send. And just like that, the present starts answering the past. David doesn't waste time. He arrives at the cafe like a man who counts exits without moving his head. There's no drama with him, no unnecessary angles. He greets Era with a small nod that carries respect and history he doesn't need to narrate. He sets a thin, black folder on the table as if it weighs more than it looks. Maybe because it does. Good morning, he says. Depends on your definition, Julian answers. Era gives David the kind of smile you give to someone you've watched from the edges for years. An acknowledgement that you saw the way he stood between the worst and the people you love. Thank you for coming, she says. Of course. Mia slips coffees onto the table like a magician, swapping cards one for each. The fourth left off to the side, as if it might be claimed by the fifth presence in the room. The past. She doesn't sit, but she doesn't leave either. She hovers close enough to be helpful, far enough to be polite. It's a skill you learn in jobs where your attention is the most valuable thing you carry. Julian taps the folder with a finger. You first, he tells David. David opens it. Inside, there's a tidy mess. Printouts, screenshots, a few handwritten notes in a tight, neat script. He slides one page to the middle. Thorn's shell network, he says. At least the part we can see without subpoenas. And in est. Julian studies the spiderweb of boxes and arrows. Even at a glance, it's familiar. Marcus Thorn treats companies like Matryoshka dolls. Each one opens to reveal another. A little smaller, a little more evasive, until you get to something that looks like nothing at all. Where does it touch us? Julian asks. Here, David says, tapping a box labeled Walcott Vestry Capital, then follows a line to Croft Strategic Holdings. And here, he adds, tapping a tiny square with an innocuous name, Sable Road Partners. Julian exhales through his nose. Sable Road, he repeats. He's still using that? People repeat what works, David says, especially when nobody tells them to stop. Ena ritu night dime. Era leans in, her hand lands near Julian's without touching. Sable Road was on the tow report, she murmurs, and suddenly the table isn't a table, it's a memory laid flat. Tow report? Julian asks, even though he knows where this is going. He needs to hear it in her voice. The crash, Era says. Back then. The wrecker's invoice passed through a small billing service that had just changed hands. The new owner? Sable Road Partners. No real office. Just a mailbox and a fax line that always answered but never had a person on the other side. Julian feels the floor tilt the way it does when an elevator starts moving before you're ready. I didn't know that, he says, and he hears the way the words split half apology, half accusation aimed at himself. That's why we're here, Era says gently. To turn didn't know into no. Mia steps closer with a small, folded napkin. She doesn't hand it to anyone in particular. It just sits on the edge of the table like a courtesy. In case truth leaks. David keeps going. Sable Road intersects with an older entity, he says, sliding another page over. Nerthus Logistics. Julian almost laughs. God of the Earth, he says. Marcus and his mythology. Someone in his circle likes clever names. David agrees. Nerthus handled miscellaneous transport for a cluster of industrial clients. It also, at least on paper, provided temporary drivers for municipal contractors during workforce shortfalls. Meaning? Era asks. Meaning, David says, if you needed an unmarked truck and a driver with a city credential for one night in 1986, you didn't call a friend. You called a company that never leaves fingerprints. Era's coffee cools untouched. The crash wasn't just bad luck, she says. Not angry, not surprised. Just steady, the way people are when an old suspicion finds better shoes. We can't say that yet. David replies. But we can say the circumstances were curated. Julian leans back. The cafe hums around them, milk steaming, a grinder pulsing. Everyday sounds that don't know how to bow to tragedy. If Marcus had a hand in what happened, he says, what was his reason back then? We weren't enemies yet. You had a small company that made an inconvenient product, David says. Inconvenient to whom? People who prefer opacity, David says. Do you remember the audit suite you were building? The one that would let municipal buyers trace subcontractors 3 layers deep? Julian's jaw tightens. I remember the demo, he says slowly. We were kids trying to make corruption measurable. You were kids who built a flashlight, David says evenly. People doing business in the dark don't forgive flashlights. Era's fingers trace an invisible line on the table. We thought if we were careful and good, she murmurs, we'd be safe. That's not how safety works, David says, not unkindly. Julian looks at Era. There are whole years I can't revisit cleanly, he admits, because I was building something and convincing myself the hours I stole were investments. Because life started asking for faster answers than we were ready to give. Era nods. The thing about promises, she says, is that they're not a time machine. They're a compass. Thanks for watching. Mia sips water and watches the door the way people do when they've learned the hard way that danger has good manners. She's listening, but she's also counting. People, movements, patterns. Survival is a choreography you do without music. David gathers the pages into a new stack, the way he always does when the ground has shifted by 1 degree. Here's the present, he says. Marcus has been making a move to consolidate influence on the board. He's using Walcott Vestry as a pressure valve, and he's opening a back channel to a private equity consortium that loves distressed assets and hates daylight. How close is he? Julian asks. Close enough to pretend it's decided, David says. Not close enough for it to be inevitable. Era turns to Julian. What happens if he wins? Cuts, Julian says. Restructures. Which is code for less oversight, more speed, and a story about shareholder value that sounds good at conferences. And the flashlight? She asks quietly. It gets called a distraction, he says. Then a cost center. Then a legacy product. Then dead. Mia's eyes flick to him. Funny how the truth gets downgraded like software, she says under her breath. Julian smiles without humor. It's the only product with a soul, he says. So, it's the first thing the soulless try to kill. Then, we don't let them, Era says simply. There's no drum roll, no heroic lighting change. Just 3 people at a table agreeing on something hard. How? Julian asks. Not because he doubts, but because he has learned the power of mechanics. David flips to a page with a list of names. We find the person who made the mistake Era mentioned, he says. The one who left a trail. We get them on record. We follow the money. We build something a prosecutor can love and a journalist can understand. Era nods like a verdict. And we protect the people who will be hurt by the splash. Julian looks at Mia, then really looks. This puts you in a circle you didn't ask to stand in, he says softly. Mia shrugs one shoulder. I work a job where I carry strangers' birthdays, allergies, and secrets about who they are when they think no one is watching, she says. This doesn't feel so different. Era's hand brushes the back of Mia's chair in a tiny, automatic gesture of protection. It answers a question Julian hasn't asked out loud yet. The note, the folding of napkins like a goodbye Mia isn't a messenger drawn at random by fate. She's Era's person. Family by blood and by choice. They break, not because they're done, but because planning needs air. Outside, the city has decided on a kind of sunshine that forgives anyone willing to squint. Era loops her scarf. David scans the street. Julian copies down a number from David's folder, then burns it into his mind the way you memorize a door code you'll need in a hurry. Next step, David says, is getting eyes on Nerthus and Sable Road. Quiet eyes. I can start with public filings, cross-referenced to insurance claims around the 1986 window. There's a seam there. I can feel it. Do it, Julian says. I'll handle the board. Carefully, David adds, with the gravity of someone who's had to pick up pieces before. Julian nods. Carefully, he echoes. Era touches his sleeve. And truthfully, she adds, always, he says. And here's how brave and naive that sounds, even now. They don't hug. Movies teach you to expect hugging. In real life, people hold a little distance, so the choice to step closer still means something. They part with logistics instead of sentiment. Noon calls, secure drives, a back-office scanner at a law firm that still believes in paper. The choreography of an honest fight. On the drive back, Mark glances at Julian in the mirror. He doesn't ask, everything okay? He asks, how bad? Bad enough to get better, Julian says. Mark grins a little, his version of applause. Then, we're in the second act. Julian's phone buzzes. An email from the board secretary. Reminder pre-read for today's governance session attached. He opens it. There's a slide with a polite euphemism for the thing Marcus wants. Portfolio realignment to match emergent strategy. He forwards it to David with a subject line. Translation. Kill the flashlight. Then he calls a number he hasn't dialed in months. Grace Lynn, the board member who looks like quiet and fights like weather. Julian, she answers crisp. I was going to call you. Beat you to it, he says. I need 10 minutes before the session. You have 7, she says. Walk with me. They loop the block around the building where the governance session will be held. Grace moves at a pace that tells you she's late for something and exactly on time for herself. Give me the line, she says. Marcus wants to frame legacy products as deadweight, Julian says. He'll dress it in numbers. I'm going to argue that transparency is not a product line. It's an operating system. And that gutting it is the kind of short-term brilliance that leaves us dumb for a decade. Good, Grace says. Numbers beat metaphors, but metaphors win the room. You'll need both. There's more, he says softly. There always is, she says. But not here. Not yet. He respects the boundary. Will you back the motion to delay any portfolio decisions until we complete an independent risk assessment? Yes, she says. Because when men like Marcus say speed, they mean less time for anyone to notice. In then abenda, for happen friend, he laughs once. Thank you. Don't thank me, she says. Bring receipts. I will. Then she glances up, and her gaze snags on something over his shoulder. Smile, she says. We're being lobbied. Marcus Thorne walks toward them with that particular brand of charm that makes people want to tape their wallets to their ribs. He's the kind of handsome that never learned empathy. Every feature well placed, every sentence rehearsed with the best lighting in mind. Julian, he says, like he's greeting a brother at a wedding. Grace. What a morning. Marcus, Grace says, and manages to make 2 syllables sound like an audit. Big day, Marcus continues. Alignment, momentum, all the words that make shareholders write me poetry. Poetry has line breaks, Grace says. Do your numbers? He laughs real enough to get by. Walk with me, he says, because he likes to pretend he choreographs people. Already walking, Grace says, and doesn't change speed. Marcus falls in beside Julian, not Grace. Predators prefer to flank. I saw you left the dinner early last night, he says casually. Everything all right? Julian keeps his face neutral. Scheduling, he says. Ah, Marcus replies. Scheduling, the disease of the useful. Grace's phone buzzes. She peels off with a nod that is not exactly permission and not exactly escape. It's a cue. Play nice, but remember it's a play. About the portfolio, Marcus begins. I've read the deck, Julian says. And you've seen how the market is rewarding discipline, Marcus says. Clarity, focus. Your version of focus, Julian says, has an interesting blind spot. Oh? Marcus says, eyes bright with feigned curiosity. Transparency, Julian says. Marcus smiles like a cat discovering a sunbeam. Transparency is a nice story, he says. But stories don't compound quarterly. Neither do lawsuits, Julian says. Until they do. Marcus's smile doesn't change. His eyes go flat, then recover. A flicker, the kind that tells you where a man's nervous system lives. You've always had a soft spot for myths, he says. Flashlights that save the village. Fine. Keep your toy for now. But don't expect me to let nostalgia run the portfolio. It's not nostalgia, Julian replies. It's governance. Marcus leans in just enough to suggest intimacy while performing threat. Governance is what we say while we're doing politics, he murmurs. Let's be honest. We both like to win. We just disagree on who gets to keep the prize. Julian doesn't step back. He steps sideways. Removes the intimacy. Keeps the threat visible. See you inside, he says. Marcus lets him go with a practiced chuckle, then calls after him as if they're old college friends. Bring your flashlight, he says. We'll see what it reveals. Inside, the session is a ballet of polite interruptions. There's a clock with numbers too big for the wall. There are water bottles sweating onto coasters. There are eyes watching the room the way birds watch wind. Grace speaks first when it matters. Before any structural changes, she says, I move that we commission an independent review of risk exposure tied to transparency-related assets. I'd like a firm with no prior engagements within our network. Marcus smiles the way people do when they're about to say no with a sentence that sounds like yes. I love caution, he says. We should always be cautious. But the market is not a patient lover. Delay costs money. Julian follows. Delay costs money, he agrees, and so does ignorance. If we don't understand what we're cutting, we're not optimizing. We're gambling. In the old days, this would be where someone asked him for a one-pager. Today, it's where someone asks him for a story. Strange, how the room has changed. People who used to worship graphs now want anecdotes with clean morals. He gives them both. A graph of regulatory actions against companies that downshifted internal audit in the 12 months before a crisis, and a story about a mid-size firm that killed its flashlight and then tripped over the furniture. Grace calls for a vote on the motion to commission the review. Marcus doesn't flinch. He writes something in a leather notebook with a pen that probably has a blood type. He smiles at Julian afterward like a man who appreciates quality resistance. "Next time," he says under his breath. "Next time," Julian echoes, and hears how different that sounds now that he's not trying to survive a Tuesday. After the session, he ducks into a quiet conference room with frosted glass and a view that treats people like pixels. He texts David. "Motion passed. Buy us time. Where are you?" "David, County Archive. You wouldn't believe the filing system. It's like someone taught an octopus to love paper." "Julian?" "Anything?" "David." A name. A. Wells. Signed off on an equipment access waiver the week of the crash. Not on the roster. Found a payroll check from Nerthus months later. Going to look for an address. Julian. "Be careful." David. "Always." "You?" Julian. "Marcus knows I'm not asleep." David. "Good. Let him hire worse lawyers." Julian smiles. Then the door opens without a knock, which is only permissible if you're Grace or on fire. It's Grace. "Walk," she says. He follows her into a hallway lined with abstract art that looks like feelings doing push-ups. "You asked for 7 minutes earlier," she says. "You got your motion. Now give me the rest." "He sell for damages?" "He was important at Wait Kudwal. He does. Not everything. Enough." He says words like Nerthus and Sable Road and watches how her face changes without moving. "And you think," she says slowly, "that the thing we are fighting now has roots in the thing that hurt you then." "I don't think," he says. "I know enough to need to know the rest." Grace nods once, the way people do when they add a private task to their public agenda. "You'll need allies," she says. "Real ones. I have you," he says. "You have my vote," she says. "My spine, when necessary. But you'll need someone on the inside of Marcus's inside." "Who?" he asks. "His mythologist," she says. "The one who names things. People who name things keep secrets. They also keep lists. You know a name." "Not yet," she says. "But I know a pattern. Marcus likes talent wrapped in insecurity. Find the person who is brilliant and undercredited. Give them the credit. They'll give you the thread." He files that away. It sounds like the kind of simple thing that takes a complicated amount of work. When he steps back into his office later, the afternoon has that tired light that suggests the sun is thinking about calling in sick tomorrow. He shuts the door. He lets himself stand for a second, forehead against glass, watching ants become cars, watching ideas become buildings. Then he does something he hasn't done in years. He opens a box in the bottom drawer of the cabinet no one knows is a cabinet. Inside, under receipts and a program from a symphony he pretended to enjoy, there's a photograph. The willow, the pond, 2 teenagers with summer where their skin should be. He studies the way his hand looks on Era's shoulder, like a promise without words. His phone buzzes. Unknown number. He hesitates, then answers. "Julian." A pause. A man's voice, filtered through fear or poor reception. "You don't know me," the voice says, "but you know what I did." Julian sits down slowly. "Who is this?" "A. Wells," the voice says. "I used to sign things for Nerthus. I shouldn't be calling. But I read something on the internet about your board. It made me think, maybe you're not on the wrong side." Julian keeps his tone even. "Where are you, Mr. Wells?" "Nowhere good," Wells says. There's a little laugh that doesn't like itself. "Look, I don't have clean hands, but I have a memory. And I wrote things down because I thought, I thought I might need to remember later. Can we meet? Julian asks. Not yet, Wells says. I'm not a story you tell your friends. Send someone I can trust. David Chen. Julian says immediately. A beat. The security guy? Wells asks. He doesn't scare easy. No, Julian says. He doesn't. Okay, Wells says. But he comes alone. Julian's hand is already moving, scribbling notes he won't keep. When? Tonight, Wells says. An all-night laundromat on the west side. Quarter machines. Smells like soap and metal. Bring nothing that beeps. Text the address to this number, Julian says. No, Wells says. I'll call back in an hour from a different phone. If you bring anyone else, if you try to be clever, I'll disappear. I won't, Julian says. I'm done being clever. The line goes dead. He calls David. We have a ghost, he says. Name's Wells. He wants you solo, west side, tonight. David doesn't sigh. He saves sighs for movies. I'll bring cotton and a good memory, he says. Bring your patience, Julian adds. He's on wire walk mode. I was born on a wire, David says. I'll ping when it's done. After he hangs up, Julian stares at the wall until the wall stops pretending it's not a mirror. He texts Era. We may have a witness. Careful steps tonight. I'll update you when it's safe. Era. Be safe. And be kind. He'll be coming apart. Julian. I remember. He closes the box. He puts it back where it doesn't exist. By evening, the city has dressed itself in neon and fatigue. David's message lands like a coin dropping in a quiet room. I'm on site. Old machines. One other customer. Might be Wells. Will confirm. Julian, despite promising not to hover, drives to a diner 2 blocks away. He sits with coffee that tastes like endurance and keeps one eye on the door. He doesn't go near the laundromat. The agreement matters. But proximity is its own prayer. Wells calls, not David. He came, Wells says. He listened. He didn't write. I like that. What did you tell him? Julian asks. Enough to make you unpopular, Wells says. Nerthus had a standing retainer with a risk consultancy. They didn't call themselves that, but that's what they did. They were the ones who explained how to be invisible. One of their contracts that fall covered incident response for reputational events. They had a phrase for it. Narrative capture. Julian's knuckles go white around a ceramic handle. Did they didn't cause the weather? Wells says, voice suddenly hard. But they built the roof that fell. Do you understand? Yes. And they coordinated aftermath, Wells says. Tau, billing, local paper, city hall. A series of small, boring things that add up to memory getting replaced by a press release. Julian closes his eyes. Names, he says. Give me names. I gave David a name, Wells says. And a box, if he can get me out long enough to open a door I shouldn't still have the key to. Where are you? Julian asks, again, and this time it's not logistics. It's a human question. Wells laughs that unkind laugh again. I'm wherever people go when they've done too many favors for the wrong boss, he says. You don't need my address, you just need my truth. Truth has an address, Julian says quietly. It lives where people are brave. Then mail me there, Wells says, and hangs up. David's text follows. He's real. He's scared. He gave me a thread and a way to pull it. Runners from 2 firms we know. One likely still active on Marcus's periphery. We'll need a judge. And a journalist who doesn't mind boring. Julian. We have grace. We'll find a judge. For the journalist, I know someone who loves boring like oxygen. David. Good. Because this is going to read like 6 pages of accounting until page 7 explodes. Julian smiles. He pays for the coffee with cash again, because some nights he still doesn't want trails, even when he's laying one. On his way home, he finds himself rerouted by muscle memory. He parks where the curb remembers him. He walks on a sidewalk that once tripped him because he was too busy saying something to Era with his hands. He stops in front of a bookstore that refuses to die, the kind that smells like paper and hope. Inside, he stands in front of the true crime section without meaning to. He hates the phrase. He thinks most crimes live in fiction until someone bothers to write them down. He picks up a book by an investigative reporter who writes like a math teacher patient, precise, occasionally cruel when numbers lie. Eleanor Pike. She doesn't care if you like her. She cares if you understand her footnotes. He emails her from the sidewalk. It's Julian Croft. I have a problem that looks like paperwork and feels like injury. If you're willing to be bored before you get angry, I could use your brain. She replies, faster than people who pretend not to check their phones. Boredom is my niche. Tell me where to be and what shoes to wear. He texts David. Eleanor's in. David. Good. She'll scare the right people. By the time he reaches his building, he's carrying too many threads and pretending they're one rope. In the elevator, he watches his reflection try on expressions. Worry, resolve, the face you make when you know you're about to call your lawyer. He doesn't call his lawyer. He calls his mother. She answers on the second ring with the voice of a woman who has never once forgotten what matters. Julian, she says, you sound like your father the day the roof leaked. How did he sound? Julian asks, leaning against the wall like a teenager with a headphone cord instead of a spine. Like a man deciding between buckets and a new roof, she says. Which are you? New roof, he says. But the buckets are full. Then empty them and call the roofer, she says. And eat something. Your voice is all angles. He laughs because she's right. I will. Is it work? She asks. It's life, he says. Which is worse, or better, she says. Depending which end you're standing on. Both, he admits. You know you are loved, she says, and somehow it moves more of the air out of his chest than anything else. Not because of what you fix, because of what you are when things stay broken. He pauses. He lets the words settle into the places where plans can't reach. Thank you, he says. Now sleep, she says, or at least pretend with your eyes closed. Sometimes the body is fooled and pays you back in kindness. I'll try, he says. He does try. But around 2 a.m., the quiet starts talking. He writes on a pad with the lights off, bullet points he'll misread in the morning. Wells Nerthus, access waivers. Sable Road, billing anomaly. Grace Ally. Marcus mythologist. Eleanor footnotes. He wakes to David's morning message. Wells gave us an address. Storage unit. 2 towns over. Lease is in the name of a church that doesn't exist. Keys hidden behind a loose brick. He wants me to go with him at noon. You? Julian. I won't spook it. I'll be nearby. David. Bring donuts. Everyone respects donuts. Julian. On it. Era texts too. You kept saying truth will feel like relief. I don't feel relief yet. I feel like rain is coming. Julian. Rain is honest. We'll need umbrellas. Era. And towels. For after. Noon finds them in a facility that looks like it was designed by someone who loves beige. Corridors of roll-up doors. A manager with a magazine under the counter and a policy about minding her own business. Wells is smaller in person than his voice suggested, as if shame shrank him. Eyes that have seen too much, hands that can't decide where to live. David does the introductions. Wells doesn't shake. He nods once like a man confessing. He leads them to a unit. 3rd row. 2 left turns. 4 doors down. He slides a hand behind a loose brick, and there's the key in a plastic bag that used to hold screws. Do it, he says to David. If I do it, I'll run. David opens the lock. The door rattles up like a breath catching. Inside. Boxes. Not many. The kind that held reams of paper before people started pretending the cloud is a saint. Wells points. Left, he says. Black marker, utilities. That one isn't utilities. David opens it. Inside. Files. Old manila. New plastic. A notepad with a logo no one uses anymore. Nerthus. With a leaf like a signature. Julian doesn't reach. He watches. He lets David be careful because careful is what will keep this from collapsing into, he said. And du en ras is not the lo who maders. 4. David flips pages. He takes photos with a pen-sized camera that won't share until it's told to. He reads aloud sometimes, just enough for the room to hear. Incident response. A 17. Proximity mitigation. Asset sequestration. Media sequence. Day 0. Day 1. Day 3. Ara's hand finds a shelf and stays there. If your body doesn't have something to hold when your memory does, you fall. Wells sits on an upturned crate, not because he's tired, but because shame likes low places. They told me to file it as training, he says. They told me it kept the company safe. They told me 100 versions of not your problem. Level 2. Julian crouches, and for the first time since the note was slid under his evening, he puts a hand on another man's shoulder on purpose. Thank you, he says. Not performative, not transactional. Human. Wells nods once, then stares at the floor until his eyes can carry more light. David finds a folder with a name he's been waiting for. Not Marcus's, not yet. The mythologist's. Initials, E.R. He passes it to Julian without words. Julian opens it. Inside are emails printed on paper the color of hospitals. Subject lines that read like the minutes of a heist. Naming conventions, asset fog. Controlled narrative scaffolding. There's a signature block with an agency name that isn't an agency. A brand that sounds like a whiskey. Aaron and Rook. Grace was right, Julian says. Names. David's phone vibrates once. He checks it, then nods to himself. Eleanor's outside, he says. I told her to wait. I don't want the universe to think we don't understand warrants. Julian nods. We copy. We list. We leave it as we found it. Then, we call someone who can walk in here with the right piece of paper and a uniform that makes bold men polite. Wells swallows. And me? You're a witness who did the wrong thing until you did the right one, Julian says. Which is to say, you're a person. He sound with a 9. And the rector in one of their own. Wells looks like the word person is a language he hasn't gotten to speak in a while. He nods, then says, I kept one thing I shouldn't have. Not in here. At home. My wife doesn't know. Not because I don't trust her. Because I want her to be able to say, I didn't know. What is it? David asks. A tape, Wells says. An old phone, before phones were phones. A recording of a meeting where the mythologist explained to Marcus why the crash could be an opportunity if handled with what did he say? Graceful hands. The corridor suddenly feels smaller, like the air got shy. Julian turns to Ara because he needs to see her face when words like that hang in a room. She is not shocked. She is confirmed. There's a difference, and it matters. We'll get it, David says, and we'll do it in a way that doesn't break the chain. The chain, Wells repeats, tasting the word like it's a test he hopes to pass. Okay. Outside, Eleanor takes the box of donuts like a sacrament. Tell me a bedtime story, she says, flipping to a blank page in a notebook that looks like it has opinions. David gives her a version that respects law and momentum. Eleanor listens without nodding. She's not that kind of audience. When he's done, she says, This is going to be ugly in print. Good, Julian says. And Boring until it's not, she adds. Even better, David says. Eleanor looks at Era. You ready to have your name in a sentence next to words like then and now and still? Era takes a breath. If it helps another girl not have to learn how to fold goodbye into a napkin, she says. Yes. Eleanor doesn't write that down. She looks at Era like it's in ink anyway. They disperse because attention is a currency, and they can't afford to spend too much in one place. On the way to the car, Julian feels the pull of the willow again, the way a scar itches when the weather turns. He texts Grace, Aaron, and Rook. Mythologist. Initials ER. Does that ring for you? Grace. Unfortunately, yes. I'll call you from a landline because I am ancient and superstitious. Don't be cute. Be exact. Julian. Exact is the only thing I have left that money can't buy. At home, he lays the copied pages on the table and arranges them the way you arrange a puzzle when you don't know the picture yet. There is a grid that makes its own sense if you stand far enough away. There are dates that sit like chess pieces. There are words that don't apologize for themselves. Sequestration, fog, capture, mitigation. He thinks of Era saying promises are compasses, not time machines. He thinks of Mia, who held the room together with the same hands that carry plates night after night. He thinks of Marcus, who believes the only real betrayal is losing. He sends one email to the board distribution list that he knows will leak. It contains exactly one sentence, dressed like a proverb. We measure value poorly when we only count what shows up on the quarterly. Then he calls his mother again, just to hear someone breathe like the world isn't an exam. Did you eat? She asks. Donuts, he says. That's not food, she says. It is if you're investigating capitalism, he says. Eat soup, she says. And don't turn into a slogan. He laughs, promises soup, and hangs up. When the night comes, it doesn't argue. He falls into it without practicing sleep, because sometimes your body pays you back without asking for receipts. In the morning, there's a message from David that feels like a hinge. Got the tape. Chain intact. Wells did a brave thing and didn't break. I'll bring it to you and Eleanor at noon. Bring ears. Julian replies with 2 words that fit more than they carry. Thank you. He sends Mia a text, too, because the story doesn't move without her beginning. Coffee on your break? To say what gratitude can't in a note. Mia. 5 minutes at the back door. Don't bring flowers. Bring good news. He smiles. He believes, for the first time in a long time, that good news might be a thing you can build with hard parts. And somewhere, in an office with too much glass, Marcus Thorne picks up a phone and says to someone who calls him Sir, find out why Julian Croft is smiling. David arrives at the cafe like a man who counts exits without turning his head. He lays a thin folder down maps of shell companies and little arrows that all seem to bend toward Marcus Thorne. 2 names jump. Sable Road Partners and Nerthus Logistics. Era leans in. Sable Road sat on a tow invoice the week of the crash. Not luck. Curation. David traces lines. Nerthus provided miscellaneous transport and city-credentialed drivers perfect cover if someone wanted a truck that left no fingerprints. We can't say cause, he warns, but the circumstances were arranged. Julian will stall Marcus at the board. David will pull quiet threads. Era anchors the compass. Turn, didn't know into no. Mia hovers present, steady family by choice and blood. At governance, Grace Lynn backs Julian's motion. Commission an independent risk review before any portfolio realignment. Marcus smiles like a cat in a sunbeam. Transparency is a nice story, he purrs. Stories don't compound quarterly. Julian answers, neither do lawsuits until they do. The motion passes. Time bought. A call slices the afternoon. A. Wells, a former Nerthus signer. I don't have clean hands, he says. but I wrote things down. He demands David alone at a West Side laundromat. That night, the witness is real. 2 firms on Marcus's periphery and a phrase that tastes like smoke, narrative capture. Next day, a beige storage facility, a key behind a loose brick, boxes labeled utilities that aren't. David photographs quietly, chain intact. Memos read like a heist's minutes. Proximity mitigation. Asset sequestration. Media sequence. Day 0, Day 1, Day 3. Then the mythologist's initials. E. R. Agency facade, Aren, and Rook. Grace later texts, rings a bell. Julian loops in Eleanor Pike, a reporter who loves footnotes more than applause. Wells confesses one more piece. An old tape, a meeting where the mythologist sells Marcus the idea that a crash can be an opportunity handled with graceful hands. David retrieves it, the chain unbroken. Noon, meeting set for playback. Julian texts Mia. Coffee? Bring good news. She replies, 5 minutes, no flowers, just truth. They play the tape at noon, tinny room tone, then 2 voices. One is Marcus, smooth as polished glass. The other is clipped, precise, a consultant who treats language like a scalpel. Riverton incident, the consultant says. Treat as reputational event. Sequence. Day 0 capture, Day 1 consolidation, Day 3 inoculation. Use Sable Road for tow flow. Bill through Nerthus, under training. Keep the client's flashlight busy elsewhere. Marcus. And the girl? Consultant. Proximity mitigation. We don't touch, we redirect. Graceful hands. Silence afterward is heavier than sound. Eleanor doesn't swoon, she lists. I'll need raw device, chain of custody, time source, corroborating docs, tow invoices, city logs, any email headers. We also get a forensic audio authentication independent lab. Without that, it's just a story. David nods. Already in motion. Grace calls from a landline, of course. Your mythologist is likely from Aren and Rook, she says. Initials ER. If they're still orbiting Marcus, they'll move to sanitize. You have a narrow window. David works the judge he trusts for straight rules. By late afternoon, a limited seizure warrant is signed for the storage unit. The manager hands over a clipboard with hands that believe in procedure. Boxes leave with numbered seals. Chain intact. Marcus moves, too. A friendly outlet pushes a piece about legacy bloat and realignment. A whisper campaign paints Julian as sentimental, blocking modernization. Grace texts, hold your line. Bring receipts. Mia notices a tail after her shift, a man who learns nothing from how well she clocks faces. David assigns a quiet escort, rotates her routes, adds a dumb phone for if the smart one goes dark. Era squeezes Mia's hand, the way people do when they want strength to be contagious. Eleanor sketches the spine of her piece on a napkin. What happened, how it was made to look, who built the fog, why it matters now. I'll bore them before I break them, she says. Numbers first, outrage later. Julian drafts board remarks that read like a ledger. Dates, vendors, authorizations. No adjectives. He texts Grace the deck. She replies with 3 words. Exact. Not cute. As dusk falls, David pings. Lab took custody of the tape. Turnaround in 48. Wells safe for the night. Julian sends Mia a single line. You did brave work. And she replies, so did you. Tomorrow, more. The E on the original note still waits for its meaning. They let it wait. Some truths ripen on their own clock. By noon the next day, the lab calls David. Voice print consistent. No edits detected. Timestamp aligns with the old device's clock drift. Chain intact. Eleanor grins like a math teacher. That's admissible boring, she says. Now we build the frame. Grace loops back with a name. Edmund Rook, principal at Iren and Rook, the ER in the memos. He's the mythologist, the one who named proximity mitigation, who sold narrative capture as a service line. A narrow judge extends the warrant. Limited on-prem records hold at a satellite vendor that serviced Aaron and Rook. David walks in with marshals. They bag a binder of client glossaries, E and R, jargon, plain meaning. A calendar with MT penciled 3 times the week of the crash, and a billing export that routes Sable Road, Nerthus, Walcott, Vestry. Dates rhyme. Numbers match. Receipts. Marcus counters. A leak paints Julian as romantic about governance, whispers that he's blocking modernization. Grace steadies the room. We are blocking amputation without imaging. The 2 swing votes blink, then pocket their hands. Not yes. Not no. Stall earned. Mia spots the tail again, same shoes, new jacket. David's team intercepts politely. A conversation on a quiet curb, a camera surrendered, a card taken. If you're lost, David tells the tale, ask directions from adults. The man leaves shorter than he arrived. Wells shakes, but shows up. He signs a sworn statement. David notarizes. Eleanor tapes the interview audio with consent. Wells names Edmund Rook in the room. He said the crash wasn't weather, Wells whispers. It was a forecast someone could sell. Back in governance, Julian doesn't sermonize. He enumerates. Tow invoice Sable Road, driver credential Nerthus, consult memo Aren and Rook, voice on tape. No adjectives. Then, 1 sentence. Transparency isn't a product, it's the floor we walk on. Marcus smiles too wide. Floors can be replaced, he says. Not while we're standing on them, Grace replies. Eleanor drafts the nut graph. What looked like misfortune reads, in documents and tape, like choreography. She cues 2 corroborating sources, the tow operator's retired dispatcher and a city clerk with long memory. Both nibble. One agrees to meet. That night, a courier slides a cease and desist under Eleanor's door, boilerplate thunder from a firm that bills by the frown. She posts a sticky note on it. See you in the footnotes. Julian texts Era, ER, equals Edmund Rook, tape affirmed. Era replies, Good. Now make it safe for the next girl who might have been me. He answers with the only promise that fits. We will. Slowly, then suddenly, his way lit. Morning breaks with paperwork that can move mountains. The DA's office takes David's packet tape authentication, Wells' affidavit, Aaron and Rook glossaries, billing chain, and opens a limited scope inquiry. Not fireworks, foundation. Eleanor publishes a first piece that reads like a ledger with a heartbeat. The architecture of a crash, how vendors, vocab, and invoices rewrote a night in Riverton. She prints the jargon table, proximity mitigation equals keep witnesses inconvenient, narrative capture equals flood the zone, and embeds a waveform snippet the lab okayed. It trends not because it's juicy, but because it's verifiable. Boring goes viral when it proves something. Marcus calls an all-hands town hall in a glass atrium that makes applause sound expensive. He smiles at the cameras. We are committed to modernization, he says. Julian steps up after him with a slide that has only 4 dates and 3 arrows. No adjectives. Before you modernize, he says, audit the map you're using. Grace moves inside the board like weather, pairing the 2 swing votes with external counsel who explain the personal risk of optimizing away transparency during an active inquiry. Shoulders lower. Pens stop tapping. The motion Marcus wanted dies in committee with a sentence that sounds like mercy. Deferred. Pending independent review. And the strike time. David escorts Mia and Era through a new routine, alternate routes, check-ins. A little card that says, if lost, call me with his number, meant for pockets and panic. Mia teases him, you're overprotective, but keeps the card. Era buys the team coffee with names spelled right. It's a small rebellion against being handled. Wells meets the DA in a room that smells like old books and new nerves. He repeats the story clean, no embroidery. He hands over the original tape device. The DA signs the chain log. David countersigns. Wells walks out lighter, which is not the same as light. Eleanor's follow-up lands, the mythologist, inside Aaron and Rook's vocabulary for disappearance. She names Edmund Rook, anchors him to 3 clients, 2 public, 1 redacted, and prints a memo line that reads like a confession. Floor equals transparency. Remove only after occupants relocated. The internet does the math. Marcus blinks. He switches counsel. A letter arrives at Julian's office requesting a collegial resolution and offering to reassess portfolio sequencing. Translation: call off the dogs. Julian replies with 1 sentence: bring receipts. That evening, in a modest hall with bad chairs and good intentions, Julian stands beside Era and Mia and announces a fund that doesn't sound like PR. The Willow Initiative grants for archival access, public records fees, forensic labs, the boring tools that make truth possible for people who don't have billionaires on speed dial. Not charity, he says into a microphone that pops. Infrastructure. Applause is odd and warm. Era squeezes his hand, wants approval, not permission. Mia reads a short line from a card and almost doesn't finish. Some promises aren't a time machine. They're a compass. The room holds. On the car ride home, David's text lands like a metronome click. Judge approved a narrow subpoena on Aaron and Rook's client comms around the crash week. Tomorrow we pull thread. Julian watches the city blur and thinks of a tree that isn't there and a floor that still is. Tomorrow is the last turn. And floors, once named, are hard to rip out while everyone's watching. By midweek, the thread pulls clean. The subpoenaed cash from Aaron and Rook lands. Calendars, glossaries, 2 playbooks stamped draft that read like choreography for grief. In a deposition room with walls the color of unslept hours, Edmund Rook folds quickly, not from virtue, from math. He confirms the vocabulary, identifies the client codes, and admits the phrase "graceful hands" was his. The DA's office doesn't cheer. It files. Grace convenes the board. Julian doesn't bring poetry, he brings chronologies. The room, which used to crave charm, now wants sequence. Motion. Suspend portfolio realignment, expand internal audit, ring-fence the flashlight as a protected function with independent reporting. Vote passes. Marcus asks for a recess, then a lawyer, then, finally, time. He resigns to focus on personal matters. No one claps. Eleanor publishes her anchor piece. Proximity, mitigation, and the price of fog. It is boring until it detonates. She prints documents, embeds the authenticated audio, and footnotes the map from Sable Road, Nerthus Walcott Vestry. The ending doesn't gloat. It asks a question that lands like a ledger. What do we call efficiency when it erases people? Wells, hands steadier now, signs the last page of a cooperation agreement. He'll answer questions in court. He'll also mow his own lawn for the first time in years because shame is heavy and grass is forgiving. Mia quits the restaurant without a scene. Ara teaches her how to write grant letters that get yeses. In a community hall that smells like varnish and determination, they hang a modest banner. The Willow Initiative. First 5 grants go out records requests, lab fees, bus fare to a courthouse 2 counties away. Infrastructure, not charity. On a quiet morning, Julian and Era walk to where the willow used to make a room out of shade. City workers planted a young tree there last fall. No plaque, just possibility. They stand in the almost shadow and let the not yet be enough. About the note, Julian says. The E, I kept wondering. Era smiles. Mia added it, she says. Her word for the day she slipped it to you. What word? Enough. He laughs, and it sounds like a roof finally holding. Mia arrives with coffee and a stack of forms, grinning at the way the wind keeps trying to turn pages before she's ready. David texts 3 words that feel like a benediction. Floor holds firm. They don't make speeches. They make calls. They write checks that open filing cabinets and pay for stamps. They answer emails from people who've lived too long under somebody else's definition of inevitable. At dusk, the new tree leans the way young things do when they're learning where light comes from. Julian looks at Era, then at Mia, then at the city that almost taught him to be loud instead of true. Promises, it turns out, aren't time machines. They're compasses. And sometimes all a compass needs is one letter to point home.